She wasn't supposed to have a rifle. Hell, she wasn't even supposed to get near the fighting. Captain Lauren Hayes was just there to observe, take notes, file reports about what the real operators were doing. But when America's deadliest snipers started missing shot after shot in the Hindu Kush Mountains, when an entire SEAL squad found themselves pinned by enemies they couldn't even see, she did something that changed everything. She walked into that kill zone alone and made every bullet count. But here's what the classified after-action reports won't tell you about the blonde analyst who single-handedly saved Team Delta. The trucks coughed diesel exhaust before falling silent along the ridgeline. The Afghan sun was brutal at 0900 hours, turning metal hot enough to brand skin and making air shimmer like broken glass. The valley below opened like a wound, fractured granite and shadowed caves that stared back like dead eyes. Wind came in knife-edged gusts carrying metallic taste of heated stone, pushing dust devils across the valley floor in lazy spirals before dying away and returning from different angles. The kind of wind that made snipers curse and check their data cards repeatedly. Captain Lauren Hayes stepped down from the lead truck, boots finding purchase on stone that wanted to slide. Early 30s, unremarkable in the way career military learned to be. Her blonde hair was secured in a tight regulation bun beneath her helmet. Standard plate carrier, M4 slung tight, compact binoculars hanging against her vest. No long rifle, no fancy optics, nothing screaming operator. What was unusual wasn't what she carried, but how she moved. While others shifted against gusts, she stood perfectly still, head tilted like someone listening to music only she could hear. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Collins hit the ground running, scanning high ground while his team unloaded. At 38, he moved with controlled aggression of someone who'd earned his trident, making right decisions in places where wrong ones got you shipped home in aluminum boxes. His SEALs spread out with casual efficiency. No drama, no shouted orders, just placement and that particular silence before work began. The sniper element peeled off toward a jagged outcrop, offering clean angles into the valley. Only then did Collins glance at their uninvited guest. "You got what you need, Captain." Professional neutrality, but his eyes said he'd been doing this job before headquarters started sending observers. "I do," Lauren replied simply. "No explanation." Petty Officer Martinez shouldered past with a laser rangefinder. He didn't lower his voice when he muttered, "Perfect. Brass sent us a desk jockey to watch us work." Lauren ignored him completely. She moved behind a spine of fractured rock and raised her binoculars, scanning the valley with systematic precision. Through her glass, the pass resolved into layers. Pale talus spilling down like sand, darker limestone where caves cut back, an old riverbed stitched with stubborn tamarisk. But it was the air itself that held her attention. Heat was clawing up from sun-baked stone, making the far slope dance. Every 30 seconds the wind would snap, north to south, pause, then return with different edge. She watched dust patterns and counted under her breath. The valley was breathing sideways. "Miss," Jackson said flatly. Wilson cursed and worked his bolt. He'd been shooting this range since he was 20. The wind call was solid, the doe perfect, and the target was standing like he was waiting for a bus. He fired again. The round sparked off limestone to the right. The fighters scattered with fluid discipline. "That's two," Collins muttered, edge creeping into his voice. From another hide, Staff Sergeant Parker opened up. The crack echo rhythm doubled as both snipers worked their bolts. High then low, left then right. Bullets sang off stone, but none hit flesh. 6 shots, Collins said through gritted teeth. "They know we're here." The SEALs worked frantically, recalculating holds. Jackson tracked Gus with his weather meter, sweat cutting tracks through dust on his face. Thermals are spiking. Drafts pushing opposite directions, like shooting through a washing machine. That's when Lauren spoke up, voice calm as someone reading weather. "You're shooting into a thermal funnel." The gust splits. One draft climbs, one falls. Every round's walking in 2 directions. Wilson cut her a look that could strip paint. "We'll adjust. Don't need a lecture from the peanut gallery." Lauren returned to her binoculars, watching heat distortions writhe over darker stone. Through her glass, enemy fighters flickered, solid one moment, dissolving into shimmers the next. Another shot cracked. The bullet sailed into empty air, striking 15 feet above target. Sharp chatter of AK-47s answered. The fighters were moving with intent now, rifles up, seeking firing positions. Collins felt the moment slipping away from him like water through fingers. This wasn't urban combat or close-quarters battle. This was precision work. And his precision shooters were throwing rounds like they were back on qualification range, having a bad day. Return fire escalated fast. Controlled bursts walked up the slope, rock dust exploding across the SEAL positions. "They're bracketing us," Martinez said. "Listen, mortar tubes." The distinctive thunk-thunk rolled across the pass. "Incoming," Collins roared. The first round hit wide, throwing up a geyser of dirt. The second fell short, but the third arced in with accuracy that made everyone's blood run cold. Wilson rolled away, blood streaming from shrapnel cuts. Another mortar cut off Collins' mid-sentence, close enough to shower them with pebbles. Jackson clutched his shoulder where Stone had opened him up. Down in the valley, figures darted between positions with coordinated movement, speaking of months of rehearsal. The ambush was unfolding like music, each part perfectly timed. "We need to move," Martinez hissed. But even as he said it, he knew it was impossible. The wounded couldn't be carried fast enough, and the route down was exposed to every enemy position. They weren't retreating anywhere. They were pinned. Lauren had slid lower against her cover, binoculars steady despite chaos erupting around her. While SEALs cursed and bled, she continued tracking patterns below. How one firing position would suppress the ridge while another repositioned. "They're not scattered," she said quietly. "They're layered." Collins heard her despite the noise and turned, face streaked with dust and frustration. "What did you say?" For the first time since arriving, she looked directly at him instead of through her optics. "Interlocking fields of fire. Whoever planned this knows exactly where you'd set up. They've drilled this scenario." As if to prove her point, another mortar landed close enough that the shock wave knocked equipment from rocky ledges. Collins stared at her, processing implications. This felt like someone had studied American tactics and built a trap specifically designed to eat them alive. And the quiet woman with binoculars was reading the enemy's playbook like she'd helped write it. Voice conversational despite chaos around them. She made a slight adjustment to her scope, clicked twice left to account for the valley's peculiar wind patterns, then settled into her natural respiratory pause. The suppressed crack was barely audible over ongoing firefight. But down in the valley, a figure preparing to launch another RPG suddenly pitched forward and didn't get back up. Martinez blinked hard, unsure of what he'd just witnessed. What the hell? Lauren was already transitioning, scope sweeping to acquire another target. She found it in shimmer of heat rising from sun-warmed stone, a fighter who thought he was invisible behind natural screen of distorted air. Her second shot was as precise as the first. The man crumpled without ever knowing where death had come from. Jackson, despite blood seeping through his bandages, couldn't help but whisper what everyone was thinking. "Who is this woman?" Lauren's finger found trigger reset, her tone as level as if calling out range estimates. "The person keeping you alive." Another round, another enemy fighter down. And for the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs felt the balance shifting in their favor. Not because of superior numbers or heavier weapons, but because someone they'd written off as liability was systematically dismantling the trap built to kill them. The tactical situation shifted so fast it gave everyone whiplash. Lauren worked through targets with mathematical efficiency. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, final. Where Wilson and Parker had struggled with thermal distortions and tricky winds, she seemed to read the air itself. A machine gunner suppressing their left flank suddenly went silent. Lauren had put a round through his chest at 450 meters, shooting through heat shimmer that would have fooled most scopes. An RPG team preparing to bracket their position found themselves one man short when her bullet found the loader as he bent to retrieve another rocket. The SEALs began to find their rhythm again, following Lauren's lead instead of trying to improvise solutions she'd already solved. "Target, cave mouth 4 o'clock, Collins said, spotting movement in shadows. "I see him," Lauren replied. She waited, patient as stone, until the fighter shifted just enough to expose his shoulder. The suppressed crack was followed immediately by distinctive sound of a weapon clattering against rock. But the enemy wasn't done. Survivors began to adapt, using smoke and coordinated movement to complicate targeting solutions. A white phosphorus grenade burst on the valley floor, creating dense smoke obscuring entire sections of battlefield. "They're adjusting," Martinez observed. "Trying to mask their repositioning." Lauren never stopped scanning. Even when smoke obscured visual contact, she watched patterns. How white clouds moved in valleys' irregular winds. Were they thinned enough to reveal glimpses of movement? A muzzle flash flickered through smoke screen for fraction of a second. Lauren put around exactly where the flash had originated. The smoke swirled, revealing a figure falling backward into rocks. "Impossible shot," Wilson muttered. "She's shooting ghosts." The mortars had gone quiet. Not because they were out of ammunition, but because Lauren had systematically eliminated forward observers calling in corrections. Without spotters to walk rounds on a target, mortar crews were reduced to firing blind. The turning point came when she identified the enemy commander directing movement from concealed position high on Valley's eastern wall. He'd made the mistake of using a radio, and brief reflection off his antenna had given him away. The shot was nearly impossible, 680 meters through shifting thermals, across erratic wind, at a target partially concealed behind natural cover. Lauren took her time, breathing with rhythm of Valley itself, letting her crosshairs settle with patience of someone who knew some opportunities only came once. When she fired, enemies' coordinated movement fractured. Without central command, their tactical discipline began unraveling. Individual fighters started making decisions based on fear rather than training, and fear made them predictable. But Lauren wasn't finished. She'd identified something that made her blood run cold. A secondary position where two figures were setting up what looked like a heavy sniper rifle, the kind of weapon that could reach their extraction zone. Without announcing her intentions, she broke cover. Enemy fire intensified the moment Lauren left the ridge. Rounds cracked past her head and sparked off rocks at her feet as she bounded down the slope, using terrain features for cover, moving with fluid grace, speaking of someone who'd learned to read ground under fire. The SEALs watched in fascination and horror as their observer transitioned from precision shooter to assault element in heartbeat. "Cover her!" Collins roared. The ridge erupted with controlled fury of professional soldiers, making life extremely difficult for anyone stupid enough to shoot at Americans. Lauren reached her first waypoint and immediately transitioned to her sidearm. The compact pistol appeared in her hands, as if it had materialized there, and she put two controlled pairs into a fighter who'd been trying to flank her position. "Ow," he finally said. "How did you do what 4 SEAL snipers couldn't?" She reassembled her weapon with movements, speaking of thousands of repetitions, then looked directly at him with eyes that had seen too much to pretend otherwise. "I wasn't always a logistics analyst. What were you?" A pause long enough for helicopter crew to finish post-flight checks. The person they sent when logistics wasn't enough. Martinez leaned closer. "What unit? What command?" Lauren's smile was barely visible, and it didn't reach her eyes. The kind that doesn't exist on organizational charts. She stood, slinging her rifle with practiced ease. "Your men did good work today. They adapted, supported, kept fighting when things went sideways. That's what matters. Captain, we need to understand. You need to understand that sometimes the person who looks like they don't belong is exactly the person you need." She cut him off with finality. "And sometimes the best way to win a fight is to have someone the enemy doesn't see coming." As she walked toward the helicopter, Wilson pulled a spent brass casing from his pocket, one that had ejected from her rifle during the firefight. "Keep that," she said without taking it. "Remind yourself that sometimes you need to change the rules to win the game." She climbed aboard without looking back, settling into a seat where she could watch the valley grow smaller as they gained altitude. The SEALs sat in contemplative silence during the flight back to base. They'd been rescued not by superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but by a woman they'd assumed was there to watch them work. Jackson, staring out the window, finally put words to what they were all thinking. "We're never going to see her again, are we?" Martinez shook his head slowly. "People like that don't stick around for debriefs. They just disappear." Collins sat across from where Lauren had been seated, studying the empty space. His team was alive because someone had intervened when conventional tactics failed. Someone who'd never been supposed to fire a shot. The brass casing Wilson still clutched caught light streaming through helicopter windows. Later, he'd have it engraved with a single word: respect. And in the valley they'd left behind, wind began to scatter evidence of what had happened there. Spent brass, blood on stone, and lingering echo of precision that had saved American lives. But the lesson would remain, carved into memory by a sharp edge of experience. Never assume the quietest person in the room is the least dangerous. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone what real professionals look like when stakes matter most.